Welcome, everyone, to Passion to Plant's live discussion on trauma training and the church. It's been a while that we have done one of these. I'm Dr. Liz Rios, and I'm the founder of Passion to Plant Network, one of the only church planting networks founded and led by a woman of color. We are a fully egalitarian network that trains Black and Brown planters to develop holistically minded, justice oriented churches right from the start. I personally believe that the crisis that we have at the evangelical church in the United States and all the division that we see can be linked to the fact that discipleship didn't happen in the churches that helped connect the Jesus of the Bible to the world around them, but instead focus solely on individual salvation and heaven. But that's not what we're going to talk about today. Instead, we're going to be talking about another crisis in the church that only some are aware of, and that, my friends, is trauma in the pews. The people in our churches who are carrying trauma that most often is not acknowledged, much less addressed in the church. And trauma is often more about how an event is processed than the event itself. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that to kind of lay the groundwork to the conversation that we're going to have with our newest faculty member, which I'll introduce in a few. So trauma is an emotional response to a distressing event, and it can be caused by accidents, sexual violence, natural disasters, or other life-threatening experiences. And usually immediately after these kind of events, people experience shock and denial. Long-term reactions include unpredictable emotions, flashbacks, strained relationships, physical symptoms like headaches or nausea. And there's also something that happens when trauma has this cumulative effect on you, which is known as complex trauma. And this is a long-term effect to exposure to various different kinds of trauma. The other thing that I want to mention before we continue is that there's not just one kind of trauma. There's acute trauma, there's chronic trauma, there's generational trauma. That's right. Trauma can be extended from one generation to the next. There's racial trauma. People experience the microaggressions and the cumulative effects of racism that impact our physical and mental ability to think through certain things. And believe it or not, if you don't know it, there's actually something called religious trauma, which occurs when a person's religious experience is stressful, degrading, dangerous, abusive, or damaging. And so the numbers don't lie. This is one of the reasons why we wanted to have this conversation, because the numbers tell us that about 70% of the adults in the United States have experienced at least one traumatic event in their lifetime. About 20% of people will experience in their lifetime a traumatic event that will lead to post-traumatic stress disorder. About 5% of Americans, that's more than 13 million people, have PTSD at any given time. And about 1 in 3 people will experience severe trauma. 67% of people that are exposed to mass violence also develop PTSD. And women are more likely to develop PTSD than men. And when it comes to religious trauma, and these are very conservative numbers, the sources say that 10 to 15% of adults have experienced it. Maybe you, as you are watching this, you're kind of like saying, hey, maybe I've experienced some religious trauma. And this is why it's important for us to have this discussion, because people that your leaders, the people around you in the church may be calling the uncommitted, the ones that are not showing up. And we have labels for sometimes for these people, and we say they don't love the Lord because they don't show up to church. Maybe those people have been traumatized individuals. So today we're going to talk with our newest faculty member of the Passion to Plant family, Reverend Dr. Danielle Buhuro. Reverend Danny is the founder, executive director of the Sankofa CPE Center. So she's been working with people around the country when it comes to dealing with spiritual care of training chaplains around the country. She's an ordained clergy person with the United Church of Christ, and she earned her MDiv and DMin from Chicago Theological Seminary. So let's welcome to the P2P live stage, Dr. Danny.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Rios. I'm so excited for this opportunity, and I'm so excited to spend these moments speaking with you and the family, as I like to say. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm so excited.
Well, we're excited to have you. We're so thrilled to be starting our newest Passion to Plant trauma cohort next week. And we just wanted to have this conversation because, as you and I know, and maybe, of course, you more because you're dealing with this on a day-to-day basis, training chaplains, is that there's a reason, a real legit reason why church leaders should be, should care about training themselves and also their leaders in trauma-informed leadership. So can you tell me a little bit about how did you end up in this field, first of all? And then tell us a little bit about why it's important for church leaders to be trauma trained.
Thank you. Thank you so much. First, I just want to say thank you so much, Dr. Rios, for your amazing ministry. I have followed Passion to Plant for a while now, and something that I appreciate about your ministry is you offer what I call as real ministry opportunities and real life ministry problem solving concerns for clergy. And so thank you, thank you, thank you for allowing me to join the Passion to Plant family. I became involved in this chaplaincy work as a result of, unfortunately, being sick as a child. When I was about 14 and 15 and 16 years old, I came down with a mysterious healthcare condition that would leave me paralyzed and unable to walk for about 2 to 3 months at a time. I was tested for everything. My mom and dad took me to some of the best hospitals around the country. I was tested for muscular sclerosis, lupus, HIV, AIDS, cancer, leukemia, you name it. And unfortunately, doctors were never able to give my mom and dad a formal diagnosis of this mysterious illness that would hit me in the winter months from January to March and leave me paralyzed, needing to learn how to walk all over again. And so it was these experiences of being hospitalized early on in my childhood that caused me to reflect on when I became an adult and started to discern a call to ministry. Maybe God was calling me to work in chaplaincy in particular. And so I moved into the field of chaplaincy, became a hospital chaplain for a few hospitals in Chicago. And then I discerned God calling me to teach. And so I went through the certification process to become a CP supervisor, or what's simply known as a chaplain educator or a chaplain teacher. And eventually I started my own chaplain training center called Sankofa CPE. And Dr. Rios, our ministry looks at what are the ways in which, wow, COVID-19, as you mentioned earlier, has taken a toll on us. And what else has taken a toll on us? Continued oppression from various forms and fashions, from oppression at the border to Black Lives Matter movement issues and concerns to, unfortunately, political unrest we're seeing from the White House down to various spaces and places in local government across our country. And so we have to come face to face with the reality of, in the last 3 years since 2020, we have been living in this not only pandemic called COVID-19, but we've been living in years of pandemics around racism, sexism, classism, ableism, you name it, ageism. Say it again?
All the isms.
All the isms, right? And so now we're coming face to face with the reality around having to address how living in all of these isms is having a profound effect, in particular on our mental health. And so I am so excited about this class with Passion to Plant, because here's our opportunity to engage in some courageous, bold, authentic conversations with clergy around how we can support people having Jesus and a therapist, engaging in not only prayer and meditation, but mental health strategies and interventions.
Well, hallelujah. Praise the Lord for Jesus and therapy. We believe in both. There's no shame and no judgment. And we believe that, as you learn and as you see that, especially if a mental health professional does say, that there's therapy that's needed, we believe in it. And that's why this is an important conversation too, because like you mentioned, I remember when we first went into COVID, there was a lot of discussion, more importantly for a lot of people, about, do we stay open or do we close, or how do we pivot, right? Those were the major conversations. And it was a little bit later that people started saying, we're having all these other things that are happening just by people being home and not having the interaction with people, and that led to other conversations. But even before COVID, we already were having, conversations about race, like you mentioned, about all the isms that make church spaces not as inclusive as Jesus wanted them to be. And so, how do you feel about leaders who do not prioritize this kind of learning for their leaders?
I'm saddened by it, to be honest, Dr. Rios. I think that we have to begin to reflect on how do we as church leaders offer holistic care to people in 2024 and beyond. In some sense, as religious leaders, as people of faith, we are comfortable engaging in conversations around theology and religion and spirituality and faith. But a question that we have to begin to challenge ourselves to reflect on is, how is God calling us to care for the other parts of people's being? How are we called to care for all of the things that impact people's bodies? How are we called to care for all of the things that impact people's minds? So before I can have a conversation with you about God or Jesus, religion, or faith, what if you're homeless? What if you're hungry? What if you're a victim of domestic violence? What if you're a migrant? What is my responsibility to you and the social needs or social concerns that you have? One of the things that I love about the faith is, oftentimes when we think about Christianity in particular, before Jesus talked about the kingdom of heaven, he always took time to care for people's basic human needs first, such as feeding people with 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread, or performing miracles and healing people who were sick with various types of infirmities.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question for us becomes, why have we moved away from that? What are the ways in which we, in our faith, have moved away from the basic tenets of the founding principles of our faith? And now we've decided over the years that we only want to minister to one part of people's being, and that's their spirituality. And so I'm saying now we have an opportunity now to shift. If COVID-19 hasn't done anything else for us, it's given us the opportunity to recommit ourselves to our ultimate doctrine of our beliefs and our faith. We also have to take into consideration the emotional needs that many people are wrestling with in these moments. Not only do we care for what's going on with people's physical body, but we have to be concerned around what's going on for people with their minds. Even in Christian circles, we talk about Apostle Paul's famous statement in Romans chapter 12, verse 2. He states, "Be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind." How are we in Christian spaces helping members of our congregation find mental health transformation and renewal of their mind? This also has to be a question that we come face to face with. So, in our churches today, we have youth pastors, we have women's pastors, we have pastors for men's ministry, we have pastors for environmental justice. What would it look like to have a pastor for mental health therapy?
Ooh.
What would it look like to employ an associate minister to provide mental health services for members of our congregation? Because people are hurting today, now more than ever before. Unfortunately, rates of suicide are skyrocketing. What is our response as people of faith, as clergy, to the huge ways in which so many people today are wrestling with depression, anxiety, PTSD, and other forms of mental illness? Where is our voice? Where is our responsibility? Do we believe that we're simply supposed to pray for people and that's it? Or do we believe maybe one idea can be to share names, telephone numbers, and websites of mental health therapists in our church bulletins or on our church Facebook page? September is Suicide Awareness Prevention Month. What would it look like for every September us to invite a mental health therapist to come to our faith communities and give a presentation on mental health resources? May is Mental Health Awareness Month. What would it look like in May to have mental health professionals visit our faith community? Do we even have a network of mental health professionals in our Rolodex where we can refer people when they are having a crisis on Sunday mornings in our faith community? These are the questions that we will grapple with and take a deep dive into answering in this upcoming course. And I'm so excited about it.
Ooh, I'm so excited too. And I often have conversations with church leaders and pastors, and one of the things that comes up is like, how do I introduce this? And I'm always telling them, if we think about it, Jesus's life was shaped from the very beginning by trauma. I mean, if we think about it, and it
Yes.
didn't diminish his kingship or his salvific power, right? It actually made us feel closer to him. It actually made us feel like he was part of our mess, right? That's the whole reason he came in, right? We just came out of our Christmas and season, and we were talking about how Jesus came into the darkness. Well, that can be expanded because that darkness was the messiness of life, and the trauma that he also went through from the very beginning. And I think why this is so important too for church leaders to understand is that not only is it something that, as we've talked about already, most people are grappling with. You've mentioned it. How do you deal with that Maslow's hierarchy, right? We got to deal with some of the things that Jesus did too, right? Let me feed you, and maybe you'll be open to some of these other things. But a lot of the churches they're thinking about butts and seats, right? That's like, again, we came out of COVID and everybody was like, oh, we've learned that what was so important, and it wasn't performance, and it wasn't this. And I don't know about you, but I'm starting to see churches go right back to where they were pre-pandemic. And what's important is for people to understand that because trauma, it affects everybody in so many different ways. And again, nobody is going to be free from some kind of trauma. If you're 2 years old, maybe, but I give you time, because again, every trauma is going to touch our lives in so many different ways. There's no one that's going to go into your ministry or your church community that hasn't been impacted by trauma. But the thing is that it's not just mental, right? It's also physical, and we can't separate the two. And that's what we also learn about with Jesus, that if we think about the Garden of Gethsemane, right? Oh my God, wasn't that like, right before his crucifixion, he starts to sweat blood. I don't know, but that's the manifestation of some trauma going on, and it's a documented medical condition, but he was going through acute stress. And we don't talk about that when we just like talk about how he he gave his life for us, and he did it willingly, which he did, but there was trauma going on in that experience. And so there's so many different ways that we can share with people as we introduce this being a trauma informed church, right? Because that's what we're really hoping for through this class. The people that come through our Passion to Plant training, that they will not only grapple with the things that we tell them about being holistic, being justice oriented, but also trauma informed, because people cares, God cares about our relationships, and our experiences. So I'm wondering, what has been some of the misconceptions, if you will, about trauma that church leaders should be aware of?
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. First and foremost, there are several misconceptions about trauma. First and foremost, one myth that we have is that we can simply pray trauma away. That if we pray hard enough, if we fast enough,
Come
if we
on.
touch and agree and speak in tongues long enough, the trauma will just disappear, right? We also have a belief that because we've become so used to trauma, unfortunately, the biggest myth of all is that it doesn't exist anymore, or somehow we've learned to normalize trauma. Growing up, my parents, my biological mom and my biological dad, divorced when I was about 2 or 3 years old. And then my mom remarried my stepdad. And unfortunately, there were times when we were poor. We didn't have enough food to eat. There was even some times when we were homeless on a couple of occasions. We got evicted from our home. And
Mm.
growing up, I had no idea how these experiences would later impact me.
Mm.
Growing up, being poor, being hungry, being homeless at one point, I had no idea. I said, oh, if I look to my left and look to my right, most of my little Black friends are in the same predicament where their parents are poor, or maybe their parents are divorced, or maybe there's drug and alcohol abuse in the family, maybe there's domestic violence in the family, maybe a member of our family is incarcerated. I grew up thinking these were just normal occurrences
Mm.
until I became an adult and I went to see a therapist and I started to learn I normalized trauma like
Mm.
many of my friends, like many of my colleagues in ministry, like many people in my family. And so another myth we have to address is that trauma is not normal. Sometimes we tend to look at trauma and say, hey, it is what it is. You survived it, so now everything is okay. And
Mm.
that's not true all the time.
Mm.
Yes, I survived it, but you want to know another problem I have? Now, into my adult years, one effect of growing up poor or in poverty or homeless at times is now 20, 30, 40 years later, I'm a workaholic. I have 3, 4, 5 jobs that I engage in as a workaholic because there is a term called poverty trauma that
Mhm.
impacts adults who, unfortunately, when they were children, they grew up in poverty. Now they wrestle with poverty trauma in their adulthood.
Mm.
We have to begin to have these conversations and attack these myths that, huh, we suffered. And these traumas don't simply just disappear, or we can't simply pray them away. A third myth that we tend to highlight that we have to resist and do away with is that we're only supposed to have conversations about Jesus or God or Holy Spirit as people of faith. And while maybe a bit of that can be true, what we have to begin to talk about is expanding our definitions of spirituality and faith. We have to begin to reflect on what are the ways in which offering holistic care is a part of spirituality and faith. Not just being concerned with someone's spirit, but being concerned with somebody's body and mind is a part of our faith. Last but not least, and this one is huge, we have to take away the stigma of mental health. There is so much stigma around mental health. Even our language of how we refer to people who may have a mental health illness is of great concern. Sometimes people who struggle with mental health, we may say they're crazy, they're loony, they're not wrapped too tight.
Mm-hmm.
That promotes the stigma. We have to watch our language in some sense. And I know I said last but not least, but I have another point. I'm originally Baptist, so I got 7 closings. I have another point. We have to begin to reinterpret, for those of us who are Christian, the biblical text, and actually talk about the stories of trauma that are featured in the Bible that we don't talk about. So Dr. Rios mentioned earlier, we are just wrapping up the Christmas holiday season where we've recently celebrated the birth of Jesus. But do we ever talk about, when we preach about the birth of Jesus, all of the trauma in that story? Let me give you some examples. Would it not be trauma inducing, or is it not trauma in Mary's story? She is a teenage young girl who is unwed, and all of a sudden, the text says, is with child. What is the trauma of being a teenage mom? What is the trauma of being an unwed teenage mom? When we preach this text about Mary, do we talk about all of the trauma she had to experience, knowing that she never had any sexual encounter with Joseph, but yet all of a sudden one day she is pregnant? Do we talk about the trauma that Joseph experiences? Oftentimes we promote a myth that men have to be strong. Men can't cry. We promote toxic masculinity. Can you imagine what it was like for Joseph to have to deal with critics during that time who were criticizing him and bashing him and shaming him for having a child with a woman he didn't have, with a young girl he didn't have sexual relations with? How do we preach about trauma just in the birth story of Jesus? What is the trauma of Jesus being a migrant? Having to be born across a border that was not his own, that he was not his own, a different country from where he was originally born in. Did you see what I just did right there? Do we talk about the trauma of our migrant siblings right now and how we can actually connect their traumas to Jesus, as Jesus and Mary and Joseph were also migrants? What do we do when it's time to talk about shame and the shame that exists in the birth story? While we highlight in the Advent season the wonderful birth of Jesus, it's also important to talk about the trauma of shame that's reserved for women. If she terminates, shame. If she keeps the baby, shame. If she loses the baby, shame. If she can't conceive a baby, shame. If she only has one baby, shame. If she has too many babies, shame. If she leaves the baby with the caregiver to go to work, shame. If she's unemployed and doesn't have a job, shame, right? Right there, there's so much trauma around the shame of childbirth and child rearing just in our Advent story of Jesus' birth. But we have to have holy boldness and courage to preach that text from that perspective of trauma. I'll pause there for a moment.
Listen, that right here, we could just like pass the offering plate right there. because it's so true. It's so true that people are so honestly, I don't think people know about this. That's the real issue. People, again, that's why they need to come to trainings like what we're having, so that they can learn about viewing the Bible through the lens of trauma, right? Because we look through the scriptures and the whole canon of scripture, we can see that there's so many different stories of, like you mentioned, of trauma. And I want to go back to something else that you mentioned, that when you were talking about how it impacted you, I was like, wow, I've seen this come up in myself. These money kind of decisions. You talked about poverty trauma, and I was like, oh my goodness, I think I have some poverty trauma. I grew up in the projects. I was, part of the welfare line where we waited for the cheese, and I remember, having to wait for certain things that I wanted, because we couldn't just get it like that, right? We couldn't just ask for it and then get it the next day. We had to wait. We had what in the Puerto Rican community, we call coge fiao, which is like layaway. That was like the way we did everything. And it made me think of, some of the things that me and my family have had to do as well, because, like you say, you have a few jobs. Honey, I'm with you. I have a few jobs myself. Because I cannot see my bank account at a certain number. I need to see the bank account at a certain number,
Yes, yes.
I'm the one that when I'm driving, if I see the E, I don't even let my car go to E. I need to have it half full. So let's
Yes.
just say that the way that poverty trauma impacted me is that I need to always feel like I have enough for in case of an emergency,
That's it. That's it.
right? And
That's it.
people, I don't think people think about that, because we are not told about that. In most church communities, it's always about, what can I do to be a better person individually. I'm not saying all churches are like this, so don't get it twisted out there. If you feel like, I'm saying something and you feel in some kind of way about it. What I am saying is that there's some churches out there that only talk about the individualistic perspective of being a Jesus follower. So it's about me, it's about mine, it's about not about neighbor, it's not about the collective. And they are not, they don't even tell you, certain things like how trauma impacts the way we think. It actually does have a physical impact on our brain. Trauma does do something to our brain. So you're not crazy when you're feeling and making decisions or not making decisions, because even indecision is part of a traumatic response. But also, maybe like not taking risks. A lot of people see me as a risk taker, but I'm like a real crazy calculated risk taker. I weigh all the different things. Okay. And then I say, okay, this looks like the path to go. Yes, I pray. Okay. So don't go crazy. I pray, of course, but God has to definitely do some prodding in me, because I don't just, say, hey, let me throw everything out. I do calculated risk, but that is also because of my trauma growing up. I like everything organized and in a certain fashion. And so sometimes people label you as, I don't know what, a prima donna, or I don't know, whatever people label you as, right? But it's really because they're not really realizing, could it be, it's almost like the book that Oprah did with a psychologist, right? It's not
Yes.
why do they do that, but what happened to them. That's the question. Why they, we kind of like put people on the margins because of the way that they behave, or some of the reactions that they have to some of the things that we're doing. But I think when you're a trauma-informed leader, you are always asking the question first, what happened to them? And I think that is why it's so important to have this kind of training. So my next question for you is, now that we're going to be going into this training next week, we start our trauma cohort. If you haven't registered, you still got time. And what are you going to address in there? What are some of the things that you're going to be talking about that will help the diverse needs of the congregation and different ages, cultures, backgrounds? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, thank you. First and foremost, I'm really excited. We're going to be talking about what is trauma in particular. What's the specific definition of trauma? Sometimes we throw this word around a lot, right? There's what I call some nice, cool, sexy words we mention in ministry in 2024, like resilience or trauma or narcissistic. I said,
Mhm.
if I see narcissistic going viral on Facebook one more time, right? These words are key words that everybody loves to throw out on social media. So first, we're going to talk about what exactly is trauma. Next, we're going to talk about what are all the spaces and places, or where are all the spaces and places that trauma exists. You may not know this, but did you know, according to some experts, divorce is actually traumatic for children, or having an incarcerated relative is actually considered traumatic, or living in a home where the building of your home has lead poisoning is considered traumatic, or breathing air that has high rates of pollution is actually an environmental trauma. And so we're going to spend some time having some really sensitive conversations around identifying all the spaces and places where trauma exists. Next, we're going to have some fun talking about what are the strategies to developing a trauma informed faith community. That's right. There are 4 important principles and 6 important principles to creating a trauma informed faith community. For example, if you have a youth pastor at your church, have they had a criminal background check? Or if you have a particular adult working in the finance department of your faith community, have they had a criminal background check? Right? There are particular strategies and interventions for developing a trauma informed faith community, and we're going to talk about those specifics. We're also going to have some fun looking at the Bible and talking about what are ways in which you can interpret various texts from a trauma perspective or a trauma centered way of viewing those texts. Let me give you an example. Dr. Rios, don't kick me out and don't fire me. Don't fire me before I start the class. What would it be like to courageously and boldly preach that maybe Apostle Paul struggled with mental illness? In the epistles, Apostle Paul says at one point, slaves, obey your masters. Women, keep silent in the church. He even tells someone to go back to their slave master. Onesimus, go back to Philemon, your slave master. Don't get married. But if you do want to get married, go ahead and get married. But I'm not going to get married. But you go get married. What if we were to have an authentic, genuine conversation about the ways in which, for example, Apostle Paul, he made a lot of controversial statements that sometimes were all over the place. What if we were to preach the perspective of mental illness from the controversial and contradicting statements that even our beloved Apostle Paul highlighted? What are
Ooh, child. Y'all, they're gonna be like, "Ooh, Lord, fire, fire." It's gonna be
right?
hot in that room.
What are the ways in which we need to also begin to reflect on how to create new ministries in our faith communities that are trauma centered? So, for example, what would it be like while we have a youth ministry, while we have a music ministry? What would it be like to start a mental health ministry in our faith community? How do we go about hiring on staff or giving even a small stipend to a local mental health therapist? What would it look like? There are so many mental health therapists who are experiencing a call to ministry. What would it be like to have many mental health therapists who experience a bivocational calling to ministry to also serve as an associate minister of our faith community. We are going to, in this class, talk about groundbreaking, innovative, creative ways of doing ministry now that take into consideration trauma and trauma-informed care in particular. Last but not least, we're going to create a database of resources. Did you know there are so many resources available, but we don't have access to these resources? So we're going to spend some time highlighting resources and giving referrals to clergy persons around what are particular services that they can bring to their faith community that support trauma-informed care. And so I'm really, really excited about that.
It is. It's really exciting because we need it. The church, the kingdom needs this kind of training. And what's interesting too is that I think some people confuse being trauma informed with being trauma aware. Everybody's aware, but things happen in our society. There's awareness of trauma and violence and all the things that we've already discussed in this. But trauma informed is really on the other side of the spectrum. There's a few different steps that need to happen before a church, a leader gets to this place of trauma informed. So I'm excited about, some of the things that you're going to be talking about too, because we need not only holistic churches, we need churches that are also justice oriented churches, and justice oriented churches are always going to lean into being trauma informed churches, because it's about creating a safe space for their people to engage in worship and to come and experience the presence of God, whether it's in that physical space or digitally, because I'm an advocate for digital as well. So I think that people that go through this with you are going to be able to make good decisions about how does this particular church in this particular context become trauma informed, and how do we address issues of loss in the family. I'll just park right there, because for some people, they know that I lost my son a year ago, and that was traumatic, probably the worst thing I've ever gone through in life. I wouldn't even wish it on an enemy. But the church really could have used a little bit of help in that area when it comes to how to walk with people in grief. And I've learned that as watching it myself, going through it myself, I saw that there was just a lack of that. And it's not that people don't want to walk with people, they just don't know how. And then sometimes in their lack of knowledge in that area, what they do, since they don't want to basically say, I don't know how to do this, they just retreat. And then retreat communicates, I don't care. And that's where, again, we experience that religious trauma, because we feel like the church abandoned us in a time when we needed them the most. So I think going through this trauma training as well will help churches to understand, these are all the traumatic experiences that people go through. And these are various different ways that you can walk with them and help them to support, their healing. Because I feel like I'm a strong believer. And it is because of that me and my husband have been able to, I would say, just survive it,
Yeah.
And move, because we don't get over it, right? We move forward.
Yeah.
But and I see he just said that, my husband he doesn't even sleep a lot anymore. He has PTSD. The doctor told him that because of the passing of my son. And so we're moving through it, but I think the church, again, can do a better job of that. Or what you mentioned before. Oh my goodness. When you were talking about shame, believe it or not, it took me back to Game of Thrones and the walk of shame. That's what it took me to, like, walking through. And that's how you feel. Like everything you do is, there's nothing that is looked upon as a good decision. Being told, what they say, right? That they hate the sin but love the sinner. that's traumatic.
Yes.
Like you said, shaming the unwed or those people that have to make a decision about abortion. And again, look at what's happening in our country right now. That women are dying because
Yes.
they cannot have an abortion because it's threatening their life. Okay, this is not about being promiscuous and using it as birth control. This is about life and death decisions. And also, again, just the emotional, sexual, and physical abuse from church leaders. We have seen this everywhere, right? We've seen this in every time we're looking at something on social media or on television. Some other crisis with a church leader has happened that has been abusive.
Yes.
So I think people, to go through something like this, and I was just on a podcast yesterday with my friend Michael Cooper about Disciples Learn, and we were talking about how you don't know everything. Like where did we get that memo that you know everything, right? And that as you're the pastor, so that's it. I don't need to learn anymore. The moment that you're even thinking of that, that's the moment that you should sit down, because you need to learn. And there's so many other issues out there that are important for pastors to be aware of, and not only pastors, because they are also they have a team. So sometimes it's not the pastor that's re-traumatizing people; it's their leaders.
Most definitely.
Right.
Most definitely.
So I'm really grateful that you're going to be working with us on this, because aside from having these justice oriented churches, I want to see just a sea of churches that are trauma informed. Can you share with us too, like maybe a success story of maybe a congregation that has implemented trauma informed practices, and that you're just like so proud of them for how they're doing and how their people are doing?
Yes. Yes. Thank you. I would invite everyone to check out the MyAlpha project. It's in Chicago. It's based in Chicago. MyAlpha project. It is run by an amazing gentleman who he decided one day to do specialized ministry for returning citizens of his faith community. And you can Google My Alpha Project in Chicago. It is amazing. This young man, an ordained clergy, had a passion for working with returning citizens, Black and Brown brothers in particular, and he wanted to create a space where these young men could come into a faith community, receive love, care, receive social services support, and receive mental health therapy. And he was intentional about saying sometimes when you're formally incarcerated, if you don't receive certain services uh, your uh, after you return home, the statistics are high for you engaging in unhealthy activities and then unfortunately returning back to incarceration. And so he created a network of social services, support systems, and mental health resources for these returning citizens. And it has been huge. It has been amazing. I want to invite you to check out the My Alpha project. It is amazing. This brother is doing amazing ministry. This project is awesome, and it's a wonderful example. It's a wonderful example of what we can offer folks. There's another trauma informed ministry led by a gentleman by the name of Reverend Dr. Heber Brown III. Heber Brown III, Heber Brown III. He is an ordained clergy who is invested in issues of food insecurity in Black and Brown communities. Many people don't know since 2020, COVID 19, unfortunately, not only was it uh, a healthcare issue concerning our bodies, but unfortunately, COVID 19 also caused food insecurity to, to skyrocket at an all time high. And so Dr. Heber Brown has introduced As a part of trauma-informed care, what are the ways in which faith communities can start their own gardens and food pantries and actually not only grow their own food, but actually distribute this food in low poverty impoverished communities and economically depressed communities. He is doing amazing work addressing food insecurity, and I think he's an amazing example of how trauma informed care and my Alpha project is an amazing example of how trauma informed care states whatever are the sociological ills that exist in a community, we as people of faith, we as ordained clergy have a responsibility to address them. It's in some sense a way of reflecting on ministry outside of the four walls of the church or outside of the four walls of the sanctuary. Trauma informed care says, how do we address unemployment? How do we address homelessness, poverty, domestic violence, mass incarceration, food insecurity? How do we address asylum seekers and migrant persons? How do we address challenges with racism at our borders? What are the ways in which we can create creative, innovative ministries that help hurting people? Trauma informed care also says, how do we push our politicians, our local legislators, right? Do we have relationships with local alderpersons and council persons, right? Do we even know who the alderman or the councilman in our particular community is? Do we know who the alderman or councilman in the neighborhood of our church is? Do we have a relationship with these persons?
Mm.
And so trauma informed care invites us to begin to think about extending our reach outside of the church.
Loving neighbor.
Yes,
Yep. No,
yes, yes.
absolutely. I think that's the next step. Again, I see a lot of churches that are very interested in being impactful in their communities. I mean, most of the churches, especially that come to Passion to Plant, they want to make a difference. You don't come to Passion to Plant, to tiptoe through the tulips. You come because you really want to be impactful and you want to know the truth and you want to hear how the church can make a difference in and not only transforming individual lives but community. And so I'm just wondering too, like there's another way that I think people that are watching could think about this too. You gave us some great examples, but also there's a lot of organizations out there that want to partner with churches, right, to help them, one, to educate them, like Passion to Plant, but also that will partner with them to help them to do these kind of trauma-informed practices. Some of the things, some of the organizations that I'm thinking about right now, off the top of my head, my friend Daniel Yang, he just became the national director for World Relief. They started this new program called Churches of Welcome, and they want churches to partner with them to help the immigrant population, as we already are seeing in some of our cities. Right there's a lot of people in our cities that need help, and even though again, we don't know where it's going to go depending on elections, right? But for right now, they're here and they need services, and so that's a person that people can reach out to. And I'll make sure that I put this in the chat afterwards. So that's Daniel Yang, World Relief, where churches are welcome. There's my organization where I work, because like you said, I have like 2 or 3 jobs. I work for Urban Strategies, and we have a program that's just started called Conecta, and they're going to be working with churches around the country to also, support post-relief services. So people that already have been connected with their families, but they need something in their community, and they're always looking for partners. So that's another one that I'll put in the chat as well. So there's there is no reason, one, why people should be ignorant in this day and age, right? Because there's so many sources of information, and two, there's no reason why you can't have some of these. If you have a space and you want to utilize it to the fullest, there's organizations that want to partner with you to make that happen. So we're going to put some of those in the chat that we're aware of. And if you are watching and you know that there's other ones that you know of, put it in the chat as well, so that other people can benefit from that knowledge. Because at the end of the day, like we've mentioned, we want to have a lot of trauma-informed people and churches. And so to end, and maybe I'll do a Baptist thing too, Dr. Danny. I don't know. I'm thinking I'm going to end, but to end, how can church leaders stay informed about these practices that we've talking about for trauma care and support?
The best way is to register and sign up for this course. That's the best way. We want you to register and sign up for this course. I'm not going to mention any other way. I think you have to come to this course, and resources will be given to you at this course. This is truly the best way to be informed. This is an amazing course. I want to be honest with you about something. I also experience this as a sharing of resources. A lot of times when we get information, many of us hold it. We sit on it. We keep it to ourselves. We only share it with a select few. In the spirit of Ubuntu, this course is designed to share with the community the resources, the information, the wisdom, the knowledge, and the insight. And so I want to invite us to come to this course. Yes, I am the teacher teaching this course, but there's so much wisdom and insight that you have, those viewing our webinar now, and we want to get you in the room so people can receive all of the wisdom and insight that you hold too. Let's come together in the spirit of collective work and responsibility. Let's come together and share our resources with one another. I really think that is so important for us now more than ever. White supremacy culture teaches us to be individualistic. White supremacy culture teaches us to work in isolation. What I so appreciate about the ministry of Dr. Liz Rios, and hi, my brother Hiram. What I so appreciate about their wonderful ministry and Passion to Plant is it is addressing an overarching thing that we really do need each other to survive. We really are called to live in community and share resources with one another. I remember growing up, I told you there was a moment, there were times when we were poor, and there was an experience that I experienced as a kid. We were poor, and there were times when we only had one food item. So there were times when my mom only had some ground beef. And she would look at the refrigerator and she would scratch her head trying to figure out, okay, how I'm going to make this a meal. There were times when my mother would say to me and my brothers, hey, call up Auntie such and such. Tell her to bring over some corn. Call up Uncle such and such. Tell him to come over with some green beans. Call up this friend. Call up this neighbor. Everybody would come to our house with a different ingredient. My mother would then take all of these ingredients, put them together, and make a pot of stew that had corn, ground beef, whatever you can think of, green beans, and we all ate. And we were all full by the end of the evening. Mm-mm. And I think in some sense, that's what Passion to Plant is all about. We are a network that seeks to say, let's all come together. Let's all bring a little bit of ingredients that each of us holds, and let's create something that all of us can feed off of, all of us can eat from. I really, really, really appreciate this anti-white supremacist way of being and this community focus that we are living into.
Amen. Amen. And that's our desire, really, to create this space where people are seen, valued, and that is different, that we see each other, right? So I'm really excited about this. And I just want to tell those that watch now or later, again, most of us have experienced some kind of trauma, but trauma, it could be a fact of life, but it doesn't have to be a life sentence. And, we serve a powerful God. And together, as we work with the Holy Spirit, a lot of great things can happen. We can heal. It may not never leave our memory, right? Because there's traumatic memory, but we definitely know that God works amazing things in our lives. I mean, I'm a testament to the fact that I survived something that I don't think I thought I would ever survive. And I have stories too. Read my book. Because I have stories about some religious trauma too. But I just think that this program is I'm so excited to bring this to fruition. I'm excited to have you as such an expert that's been doing this for years and working with so many different communities and being a network that works hand in hand, Black and Brown communities. Is just a big deal for me. So thank you, Dr. Danny, for being with us today. Thank you so much for what you're going to be doing in our cohort. And again, if you haven't looked at what we're doing and you're thinking about it, maybe you saw this webinar today and you're thinking, you know what? I would love to learn more about this, maybe for yourself, or maybe you know that God is calling you to something you're already serving in some way. Tell your pastor about it too, because he should be in the room too, or she, because there's women pastors too. We believe in them too. Make sure that they know about this. And again, we bless you forward and we thank you for your service. God bless you. Thank you, Dr. Danny. And hope we see you in the Zoom room next week. Take care.